The second story I want to talk about is a bombshell FISA document that was released thanks to Tom Fitton of Judicial Watch. So thank you, Tom Fitton. You know, I've never spoken to you, but you do very, very incredible work, very bold and very courageous, doing what very few want to do or even know how to do, basically using a legal team and a watchdog organization called Judicial Watch to constantly sue the United States government and get them to release files that they don't want to release. I mean, that's some pretty ballsy, bold stuff. So Tom Fitton, much love, much props on you to that. He's constantly suing and he's constantly being very, very successful, getting the United States people a little bit more transparency. And that to me is something that is very noble, very, you know, somebody needs to do it, and that's Tom Fitton. So he was successful and he got some FISA court documents released. They're extremely heavily redacted. If you look at, they printed them out and they showed them on the news, and it's like, it's basically almost all blacked out. So it's like, if it wasn't so heavily redacted, redacted means they black out certain parts of the text that they don't want you to see. So, you know, that usually happens. They did that in the JFK files too. They redacted certain names and certain situations. But in those heavily redacted documents, it confirmed what many people already knew. I've been saying for months, and it's just more proof of that, is that the FBI and the Justice Department and I guess the people involved misled the FISA courts into, you know, basically making it seem like a bigger deal or more outside than it was internal. And Tom Fitton was on the news. He called it a self-licking ice cream cone. It's an interesting analogy to say it, but basically they set the stage themselves, presented it to the FISA courts and said, hey, look at this information we found. Oh, look at this Yahoo News article on Carter Page. Look, this is a lot of proof of that. But what they didn't tell them, and this is according to the FISA documents that Tom Fitton got released, they didn't explain that the Steele dossier was funded by the Clinton campaign. So it was more opposition research than it was an independent article that is just like, oh, look what we found. We found this bombshell dossier that makes Trump look bad and Trump's team look bad. They withheld the information that it was a Clinton-funded, you know, situation, and that the Yahoo article that they used to, isn't that amazing? They're using Yahoo News articles to justify spying on a presidential campaign. That's the country we live in. But they didn't explain that the Yahoo article, they were like, oh, look, this is just independently written. But it was funneled through their team as well, through Christopher Steele, and basically the same, you know, the same group of people that were funding the dossier and wanted to spy on the Trump campaign. So they withheld that information. It's a lot different if you go and say, hey, we got this dossier. Here's the news article. Wow, it's such a bombshell. Can we spy? And they were like, sure. But if you tell them, they're like, hey, here's a documentation, here's a dossier that we funded and we basically created. Here's a news article that we wrote. The FISA courts probably wouldn't give them authority to spy on someone because they'd be like, no, you made that. You know, you didn't find that. You made that yourself. So it's not, it's like Trump. Oh, look, I made all this stuff. Now can I use it? It's very inauthentic and, you know, a huge deal. But once again, you know, a lot of people don't care about it. There's a lot of people who are basically brainwashed and mind controlled via emotions, women and children, and, you know, all these sort of things. So it's like, will these things matter? I don't know. I'm not Rod Rosenstein. I'm not, you know, Jeff Sessions. I've been talking about it for a year and a half now. I've known this even before the documentation. Just to be honest, you can find videos of me saying this 3-4 months ago, but now we have literal proof, which helps in court and whatnot. But I can't say I'm an optimistic person, but when it comes to justice and people being held accountable for these things that they did, which were clearly wrong, I'm not that optimistic because it's been months and years, and, you know, I just don't see people being held accountable. We'll see what happens. I don't mean to be a negative Nancy here, but it's like, we've known this stuff for a year now. Now it's coming out. Is anyone going to care? Is the Justice Department going to care? Does Jeff Sessions care? We're not really sure. And I do want to say on that note as well, what I found really incredible, which barely anybody ever said, the media's been talking about foreign collusion for the last year and a half. Oh my God, Trump might have worked with a foreign government, and they have no proof that he did work with a foreign government. But the Steele dossier was compiled largely by Christopher Steele, who is an ex-British intelligence officer. So he's literally a British government member, worked for the British government, and the Clinton campaign basically funded that, and combined with Fusion GPS and colluding with Yahoo News and elements in the FBI. You have the text messages from Peter Strzok, which are clearly biased and clearly showing that they do have bias and they're not a bipartisan just doing what's right for humanity. So how has that not come up? The fact that they literally colluded with a foreign official, a foreign ex-intelligence officer, to create justification to spy on an incoming president administration. How is that not foreign collusion? You're working with elements of the British government to use as justification to spy on American citizens. I mean, that's insanity. But once again, like I said, unfortunately, none of this matters if people don't care about it. For time and time again, they get away with whatever they can get away with based on public perception. It reminds me, I was just reading some stuff yesterday, and they were talking about Pavlov. His basically, he did an experiment on a dog where he rang the bell, gave the dog food, rang the bell, gave the dog food, rang the bell, gave the dog food. So then when he'd ring the bell and the food wasn't there, the dog would salivate because he was waiting for the food. This is the same sort of psychology and brainwashing you do to American citizens and people all over the world. The mind control of you just condition them to think a certain way, condition, and then you take the meat away from the argument and you take the truth away and you take all the valid information that you should be waiting for. It's not the bell being rung, it's the food that you want. But they've done that to the American public as well as the public of the world, is they've conditioned them to think a certain way based on certain things that happen. And it's a large reason why nothing really ever gets done. It's a large reason why we're talking about Russian collusion when there's no proof of it. We're talking about phishing emails that could be done by a 13-year-old in China or Japan or the United States or Africa or India or any country in the world, because it's really, to be honest, it's not a complex hacking skill. I'm not saying I know how to do it, because I don't, and I don't really care for that stuff. But if you talk to a hacker and you tell them about a phishing email, they'll laugh in your face, because it's like asking a professional soccer player if they can kick a ball 3 feet. It's like, of course I can juggle and kick the ball backwards and kick the ball 10,000 feet. Of course I can kick the ball 2 feet. So it's an embarrassing narrative. But once again, this stuff only matters, this bombshell evidence only matters if the Justice Department cares, if Jeff Sessions cares, if the FBI and the CIA care, and most importantly, the American public actually wake up from this delusional emotional outrage and seek some real justice at high levels, instead of just cherry-picking news events, once every year and crying about low-level news events with a police or a citizen for 5 years and never even getting to the root of the corruption, which is, the Justice Department and our law enforcement at the highest levels, not the lowest levels, the highest levels. And sometimes you got to start at the root if you really want it to sprinkle down all the ways. But if it's corrupt to the core, then of course the smaller elements of it are never going to be pure as well. The next story